So I'm going to record this, yes. So any questions you ask will be recorded. So what we're going to be doing today is learning a little bit about the After Effects interface first, and then we'll jump into Illustrator, and then we'll bring something from Illustrator into After Effects, and you'll see how that transition is going to work. It's very important that we kind of understand what we need to do in After Effects so that what we're going to do in Illustrator makes sense, okay? So for our Angry Bird thing, we basically drew our Angry Bird in a flat piece of paper, right? So you just drew the outline, you drew eyes, you drew a beak, you drew whatever, and that's all like a flat image. If we were to take that image and bring it into Photoshop, and let's say we just used the pen tool and just cut them out, and then we brought that into After Effects, what we would be able to do is, as a whole, take that entire shape and move that entire shape wherever, okay? Ideally, what we want to do is take the shape, bring it into Illustrator. We're not going to scan it or anything, we're just going to use our paper as reference. But use that as a reference to draw out what each individual layer of the individual bird would look like. So his eyes, we may want to do something later with the eyes, like move the pupils around. So we want those to be separated, okay? We may want his hairs to kind of wiggle around. That will be separated also. We may want his beak to open and close. That would be separated also, okay? Now for our first assignment, we're not going to go into a crazy amount of detail doing all those things, but we're still going to set it up like we were going to do that, okay? So I'm going to open up After Effects and just give you a little tour of After Effects just so you can see some of the fun stuff inside of it. I'm also going to pull open my definitions so I have them. All right, like we said, the After Effects hotkeys are crazy. You just have to get used to them. A lot of stuff you'll find you'll just second nature after you've played with them for a while. They just become a lot easier to use. If you're using After Effects, and here we're using CC 2015. So if you're at home, let's say you're on CS6, there's no way to go from CC 2015 into CS6, okay? It just doesn't happen. You can go from CC 2015 to 2014, and then 2014 to just CC, and then just CC to CS6, and then CS6 to 5.5, and 5.5 to 5. That's how the train works to get down saving for After Effects. It's horrible, but it is what it is. Keep in mind that if you do go from one version down a level, if something has been removed from there or doesn't exist in that version, it won't happen, okay? It's not like Photoshop where basically what you're seeing is what you're getting, all right? In Photoshop, it's pretty much you can go anywhere with your Photoshop file. If you used Illustrator, in Illustrator you have the gradient mesh tool. Illustrator 8 did not have gradient mesh. So if you took your Illustrator CC file and you saved as Illustrator 8, your gradient mesh would be gone. It would just be like a flattened image. So think of it like that. It's still thinking, it's still thinking. What's funny, last class, After Effects crashed twice on me in here. The rest of the day was fine. So it doesn't say anything good about the other stuff. The hotkeys are going to be the same regardless of version. The only differences you're going to have is stuff like this, where it says Control-Y. On a Mac, it's going to be Command-Y, okay? So on a Mac, it's just going to be Command when we have Control, and then Alt would just be Option, okay? But everything else is the same. While we're waiting for this to fully boot up, just to mention something about the importance of hotkeys is that they're not just for teachers to give to you guys so that we have something to grade you on. They're very important to make sure your work is going quick. If you ever watch two people work and one person isn't using hotkeys and one person is, you definitely see that person using hotkeys is going much quicker than the other one, okay? Especially when we're trying to refine some of the other stuff that we're doing to get in there. Oops. All right. If you've never been to Canvas before, Canvas is through the My Macomb, the same way you would register through WebAdvisor or look at any of your other stuff. Here's Angel. Way on the bottom here is Canvas. Eventually that'll be swapped out. Or you can go to, it's not showing it here, but online.macomb.edu and it'll get you in. And then you'll log in over here. Just your same WebAdvisor password or your same My Macomb username and password. And then for your class, come on. Here we go. For 2200, we have a calendar of events here. This is like when you walk into this, this is what it's going to show. So you have here, you have your first day handout, you have the student agreement, and you have that same sheet that I passed out. In case you lose it, you can just get it and print it again. And then down here is all of our other stuff. So some important dates: the hotkey test will be on September 14th. The definitions test will be September 16th. Yep, the next day, the Wednesday. All right, so keep those dates in mind and study the stuff. It's very easy to just ignore it or just hit the stuff that I say to hit without actually kind of connecting those things together. Whenever I work, I like to have that hotkey list if I'm going in a new program right next to me. And if I'm constantly going up to the move tool, what is that move tool hotkey? And then I use it, okay? Our AngryBird bounce is September 21st. I don't anticipate it taking us all the way to September 21st to finish these. We should be able to finish them before that. But that gives you a little bit more time to go beyond, to kind of push it a little bit more, okay? So by that time, we'll actually be working on the next assignment, which is going to be the blips. So we'll be doing that too. And you'll see that assignment, we only have a week to do that one-ish, okay? Our other assignments, some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. Dang it. All right. One thing that really sucks about After Effects whenever you're recording a lecture is your screen real estate. So right now my screen is shrunk down so that it can project through the projector. But what that means is that I don't have any sides, I don't have any space to utilize my stuff. There we go. Okay. So this is what the After Effects interface looks like. And it's actually an okay interface. It's not one of the best ones you'll find, but it is what it is. And a lot of this is going to come into customizing things. If you've ever used Photoshop for painting, and then used Photoshop for photo editing, and then used Photoshop for web pages or whatever, you may have found that having different tools and palettes up at different times has been really helpful. Okay, so sometimes if you're painting, you want to see the brushes palette, you want to see the layers, you want to see whatever. Sometimes you want paths and layers and something else, okay? After Effects is like that too. Under...
Can you get online?
I want my MTV. All right, so with this one, we can go under our window and change our workspace depending on what it is we're doing. And just like Photoshop or Illustrator or any other program, certain people are going to use this tool in a different way. 3D people would use After Effects to take what they've rendered out from 3D and put it together. Motion graphics people are going to take stuff from Illustrator and do whatever with it. People that don't know what After Effects is for are going to grab their videos and start to edit it inside there. Okay, you never want to edit video in After Effects like you were doing a video shoot and then you're just putting the pieces together. This is for doing effects to your video. Okay, so let's say you had a video of someone running down the street and you want to do like super slow motion of it, or you want to add particle effects to it, or you wanted to just add lightning bolts or whatever. That's what After Effects is for. Okay, it's not for taking your video and just cutting it up and just laying it out how you want and then adding some audio. All right, so here's the areas of After Effects that we are going to focus on. The top left area over here that just says CT on the projector, it actually says project. Okay, now I can scoot it over, but just trust me on that, this says project right here. Okay, so this is project, and this is where we basically import all of our stuff. So any footage that we're going to get from Illustrator, Photoshop, a video, audio, whatever, that's going to go into our project. If you've ever done video editing before, and you've used Avid or you've used Premiere, that's like your bin, right? So that's how you would import all your stuff, is right into that spot. There's an effects tab. This is where we would control effects. All right, so just like we would have, Photoshop has certain effects and filters, After Effects has effects and filters kinds of things. So that's that tab over there. Most of the work happens in here for importing. All of our adjustments would happen there in the effects panel. And then this composition is where we actually see what our footage, what our end product is looking like. Okay, so just for now, I'm going to import something just so you can see it. And then you will be able to see what I'm talking about better. So I'm going to go here, and here, and here, oops, here, here, and that guy. All right, so I'm just going to hit OK just as it is, And there it is. All right. So here's my footage. You see that I get a little preview of that Angry Bird, so I know that's what it is. I also get a folder here that has the layers. So you can see from my Illustrator file that it brought in the body, and then it brought in the eyes as 2 separate layers. Okay, and that's a setting that just by default it's set up like that. Okay. Now if I go over and I double click this, it'll open it up in the footage area. So you got to pay attention to the tabs to see what you're on. So this footage is just whichever piece I've double clicked here, that's showing me that piece of footage. If I double click the eyes, I'll see the eyes. Okay, so it's a good way to kind of preview your stuff before you actually implement it into your composition. Now the composition part, this is the actual what is everything being put together to look like. That's what that part is. Now in this case, there's nothing here that would allow us to do that. We need a timeline. Anytime you work in After Effects, you need a timeline and you need a composition, you need all this stuff. So this guy here, if you look at this little icon where it's a little, you can't see it. Let me just scoot that over then. I'll get even less real estate. Right about there and right about there. Okay. So you see this little icon right here that looks like, if you zoomed in really close, you'll see it looks like a little film strip with a red circle, a blue square maybe, or a blue square and a red circle, and then a green triangle, okay? So this is a composition. A composition has a timeline, and on a timeline we can actually do stuff to it, okay? So it's not like Photoshop where you just open it up and start playing with it. You need to have a timeline in order to function and do stuff to it. So if I just double click this, I'll populate my composition down here, and I have some other stuff turned on that I'm going to reduce so that I don't see everything. There we go. And I can hide that. All right, so now I have a timeline down here where it's showing me the eyes and the body. So these are my layers now, okay? And just like Photoshop, whatever layer is on top, what happens to it? It's above it, right? It's visible. So if I were to take the body and scoot it above the eyes, now those eyes are invisible. If I take the eyes and scoot it above the body is visible and the eyes are visible, okay? So we have to keep in mind those couple things. Now, like I said, the eyes are on a separate layer, so you see how I can just grab those and move those around. So if I was to animate those, I could animate those eyes separately. So if he's looking up, or he's looking down, or he's looking left, or he's looking right, very simple to do that because I set it up ahead of time in Illustrator to be able to do that kind of thing. Yes, sir. All right. So this is why we have this thing set up inside of Illustrator correctly, so that when it comes in here we can play with it. And this one is not set up as to the same extent that the other one was, with the hair being able to move and with the beak being able to move. But obviously those things could be set up inside of Illustrator to do something like that. Maybe. All right, so this is our composition. That's where most of the magic happens. If we had our Angry Bird, plus we had our landscape, plus we had lightning bolts, plus we had audio, plus we had all this other stuff happening, all of that will be dropped down into this layer palette so that we can play with all of those things, okay? So right now, these two things are getting read from my Illustrator file, right? That makes sense? I have one Illustrator file. There's 2 layers in there. Those are the 2 layers, okay? Now, if I go to this composition button, that's what this guy is, a composition button, I can make a brand new composition. If we look at this, see the black square going around that? That's my composition size. That's my basically my image size, right? From Photoshop or from After Effects or whatever, or from Illustrator. So that's my image size. Now, if you're working with video, if you've ever seen a video, they're typically not square. Typically a video is like widescreen nowadays, right? 1280 by 720 is a common resolution for video. All right? What was that? 16 by 9, yes. And that the 16 by 9 is just the proportions, okay? So if we took 1280, that would go evenly into 16, and then 9 would go even into 720, okay? However that works out. So that's the same proportions as that kind of thing. 1920 by 1080 is another resolution that you would commonly see. Now, working at those resolutions, just like working in a Photoshop file at a high resolution, does what to your system? Doesn't crash it, hopefully. Slows it down, right? The same thing's going to happen in After Effects, but now you multiply that times all of those individual frames, okay? Because we're working with video, because we're working with a timeline, whatever happens on one frame has to calculate, and then when we go to the next frame, it has to calculate again, okay? So for this class, you can write this down, everything we do is going to be 960 by 540, okay? So every piece of stuff that we work on for this class, that's going to be our resolution. How many dots per inch do you think we're going to be working with? 72, right. It actually doesn't matter our dots per inch because we're working on screen, okay? The only people that care about what the dots per inch are people that are going to print stuff, okay? We only care about how many pixels going this way and how many pixels going that way. So we're working at 960 pixels wide by 540 pixels tall. And you'll still see that this is going to go slow. Now you multiply that times a billion, and that's how slow it would go for some of these higher end things, okay? So that's typically what we're going to work on is 960 by 540. And you'll see over here on the right, it says lock aspect ratio to 16:9, 1.78. That's the standard stuff. That's 16 by 9 is our proportions for this. Square pixels, we want to keep square pixels. Some things do not use square pixels. Everything we're going to do is. And then we have our frame rate. Now as we're talking about this, let me jump over to our definitions. One of these we have is frames per second, okay? So the frames per second is the same thing as our frame rate, all right? How many frames are in an individual second? If you went to see the new Hobbit movie, the latest one, I think it is, where they had 3D, they didn't do just like 30 frames a second or 24 frames a second. They actually did like 48 or 72. It was like some ridiculous number because they wanted to make sure it was super smooth, okay? But typically for what we're going to do, we're just going to keep it at that 2997, okay? Which is just like a 30 frame per second setup. For our resolution, you'll see that it says quarter. If I click on the little drop box, you'll see it says full, it says half, it says third. These are just preview settings, okay? So basically, when you're working in Photoshop, you're working at whatever zoom level you're at. It's basically you're seeing exactly what it would look like, okay? But with video, it can go, like I said, super slow. We don't want it to go super slow, so we can take the resolution and pull it down. We can say, don't show me every single pixel because that's going to take forever. Only show me half of the pixels or a third of the pixels or a quarter of the pixels. And so what that means is that it's going to look very blocky, but we can work quicker, okay? So this resolution, you can basically just leave it where it is, and we can always change it later, okay? And then we have our start time code and our duration. Everything we do in this class, we're going to leave the start time code at 0, okay? The start time code is basically where are you starting with this composition? Which time are you starting this at? The reason you may want to change this is if you're working on a movie, and here's how it works for movies, is they'll go into something like Premiere or Avid. They'll take the movie and they'll cut it up and lay it out how they want all the shots to look. And then they'll say, okay, for this shot in the middle of the movie, I want to add a dragon in the background. So they take out that shot, they send it to After Effects. Those people do whatever they do, which is adding the dragon, and then they send it back in there, okay? So they know where that part was in the movie, they'll leave that start time code at wherever it is in the movie. So if it's halfway through the movie, that start time code would be halfway through the movie, okay? All of our stuff is independent. We are not doing anything like that. All we're doing is creating little bitty clips, okay? So we're going to be starting everything at 0. Our duration is going to be something that will matter as well. If I jump over to our stuff here, did I put duration in there? I don't know. But the duration part is how long this piece of footage is. You'll see that we have a bunch of different numbers here. So this is going to go from the right, how many frames, how many seconds, how many minutes, and how many hours. Okay? So basically we have 0 hours, 0 minutes, 7 seconds, and 12 frames long. Now this is just an After Effects default of whatever this is set to, or maybe it was like the last thing I imported, regardless of what that number is, we have to eventually know how long this composition is going to be. How long is our little movie? That can be changed afterwards, so it's not so important that you get it dead on, but you always want to go a little bit over in case you need it. If you go under, then you got to constantly go back. If you start off at 1 second, and then you're like, oh, I need 2 seconds, and then you add another second, and you're like, oh, I need 3 seconds, and you keep adding it, it's always best to err on the side of too much than too little, okay? So for this, I'm just going to leave it the way it is for now, but that's what that means. Then the last thing we have in here is this background color, okay? In Photoshop, what's your default background color? White. Without Illustrator, white, right? Okay, no big surprise. And in After Effects, the default is black, okay? And this is basically if we have an object and there's no background to the object, what are we going to see? We're going to see, in this case, we're going to see black, okay? Sometimes we want to see white, so we would just change that to white. And there we go, okay? Now this isn't as important. Sometimes this is something you want to change. Sometimes it matters. Sometimes it doesn't. Typically we can just leave it as it is and just adjust things later, okay? So now I have a new composition, and this new composition you'll see is like a widescreen format, okay? It's actually a little bit squished, I think, because of the projector and my laptop and how it's talking to each other, but it's pretty close. Now I can zoom in and out using my hotkeys. If I go to this zoom key, which is Z, and I hold it down and I click, or I hold Alt with Z and I click and do that. Now on these, I like to just use the scroll wheel, okay? Because the scroll wheel works pretty good where I can just scroll wheel in and out, okay? So now that we have the composition, we have that, you'll see that there's nothing down here, okay? Here's our footage. We have no footage inside here, all right? In After Effects, you can have multiple compositions. I could have one composition where I have my Angry Bird animation, another composition where I have a dog animation, another composition where I have fireworks happening, okay? And I can use those independently, or I can stack those together as separate pieces of footage. So if you look over where my footage is, you'll see that I have an Angry Birds composition, I have some layers, and I have another composition, okay? If I drop the Angry Bird down in here, you'll see that now he comes onto this layer. So now he's part of this composition as well. If I drop my, open this up, these two down here, and I just scoot them over so I can see them separately, you'll see that I have those in here as well. Eyes go on top. Now the composition one, you see that I can move the composition as one individual piece. This one, I have two pieces. I have the eyes that I can move, and I have the head. Oops, come on. Let me lock the eyes. There we go. And then I can move the head around. Okay? So you can see how those are two separate things. One's a composition, kind of like a flattened out version of our stuff, and the other one is the components, the layers of it. Okay? And then down here, this is our timeline, so that we can play this and we would see any animation that would happen to it. All right? So now for this one, I'm just going to set a couple keyframes. And this is where it starts to get tricky because you have to start exposing things inside of After Effects. So for the eyes, I'm just going to zoom in on this area here. Let's say I want to take the eyes, and I'm just going to have him look up here, from down here to up there. So I'm going to start off down here. I'm going to start off here, and I'm going to hit the T key, or sorry, the P key. And if we look at our stuff in here, you'll see that there is no, let me zoom out a touch. Come on. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Oops, I'm hitting the wrong key, that's why. You'll see that there is no P key that's listed right there, okay? But up here inside of these hotkeys, I have a lot more. Sorry, these are the definitions. These are our hotkeys. So here is the P key for position, okay? So when we're editing something for our After Effects stuff, we have to know these hotkeys so that we can get to certain attributes. So for his eyes, I wanted to move the position of the eyes. So I have to know hitting P lets me move the eyes. Okay, so I'm just going to set a keyframe just so you can see how this works. All right, so there we go. So now I've animated the eyes going from point A to point B. And I can even go in the middle here and add another one. Let's say he goes down there. Okay, so now it looks like his eye is actually rolling around it. All right, as I start to go back and forth and I start to play with this, you'll see this little green line happening there. That green line is our work area. It allows us to basically save information to the hard drive of the computer so that when we hit play, it plays back in real time. Okay, so what does that mean? When we are in Photoshop, you know how sometimes you zoom out or you do an effect or you do whatever and there's a lag, right? It takes a little bit for Photoshop to actually recognize what you wanted to do, to calculate what's supposed to happen, and then to give you the result of it. So After Effects is the same way. So when I make a change, like let's say I take the eyes and I go to generate, I'll go to adjust, that's what I'll do. Where's my color correction? And I'll adjust the levels on it. Okay, so as I start to adjust the levels, you'll see that that green is gone. There's a tiny little dot right here. And what that means is whatever you've changed on this exact spot in time has been updated. And then as I start to move, it's updating that for the entire timeline. Okay? Now you'll really see this when we start playing and we start to hit the play key, and it's not going to go that quick. What's going to happen is it'll go to frame 1, calculate what frame 1 looks like. Go to frame 2, calculate what frame 2 looks like. Go to frame 3 and 4. And as it does that, it's basically writing out what those frames look like to the hard drive. Okay? So we'll really start to see that when we begin playing with it. Now if I go and open up my AngryBird's work, there it is. You'll see how as I hit play, this green line is building. That green line that's getting built is it's called RAM preview. So it's basically storing all the information into the RAM, into the computer's components to make it play back quicker. You'll see right now it's not playing back very quick. See how slow he's going? But watch when it's done. Watch when the entire thing is filled up. It'll play through again and then it'll go much quicker. There we go. So now it's playing back in real time. And you'll see that I have some other stuff happening inside here. I have some fog along the bottom. I have some just basic shapes. And then I have my little Angry Bird dude inside there. You'll also see down here that I just have this angry composition here. And then I have this background composition. If I double click either one of those, I'll go into where I have the layers, just like we talked about with the other one, where we can see those individual pieces. There's the background, and here's all the stuff that goes into the background. Yes, ma'am.
If you wanted to make his eyes blink, do that in the composition.
Yes. We would go to this composition here, where we just have this, and we would animate that blinking happening, and then that would be translated into the other one. Okay? You have to keep in mind that all of this is live. So when you make a change here, it's going to change it in all these other spots where it's using that piece of footage. But if we wanted him to blink, we'd have to draw on eyelids, right? Inside of Illustrator, we'd have to draw those on. So at this point, we could jump into Illustrator, draw some eyelids on, go back to After Effects, and those eyelids would be there, and everything else would still stay the same. Okay? What's cool about once you understand all this is that once you have this, and you're like, hey, here's my Angry Bird. You know what? I don't like the colors. I don't like his hair. I don't like his beak. Whatever it is. You can always jump back to Illustrator, change all that stuff, and all your After Effects stuff will stay exactly the same way it is. Okay? So if you decided you wanted to give him a different color beak, let's jump into Illustrator. And Angry. It's doing something. There it is. So I can go into here and grab his beak. And just so it's really obvious, we'll make that purple, and then we'll make this darker purple. And then all I do is save it, jump back to After Effects, and there it is. Okay? So there's this link between these two programs. So at no point through this, when you're first starting this out, and we first start drawing our things today, right now, that I want you to be absolutely perfect with it before you take it into After Effects. Okay? Right now, I like to work in a very quick phase. I like to work very rough along the stages, then come back and refine, and come back and refine. Because it makes it easier for you to do those kinds of steps. Okay? So when we do our drawing of this guy inside of After Effects or inside of Illustrator, we're not going to get it perfect right off. All we need to do is get some general shape parameters, and then we can bring that in After Effects. Okay? Even for our ground here, you'll see that the background, the only thing I really have moving is this little smoke stuff happening right there. But the background elements, all I really need is just placement. Like, where is he going to be hitting? What is the ground stuff? Once I have that, I can paint it whatever I want. I can make these with green tops or blue tops, or put a big lava pit with fire shooting out, or whatever I want afterwards. Okay? As long as I have that placement inside there. All right, let me go back to my new project. All right, so let's pretend that I'm making something brand new. I'm not using any footage, because sometimes when you're working inside of After Effects, you can start off with just After Effects. Okay, you don't need to actually build something outside and then bring it in. So I'm going to make a new composition, same size or same settings as before. And then I'm going to draw something. Now there are tools up here. You'll see that there's a rectangle tool, and that works very similar to what you would see in Illustrator or Photoshop or InDesign, where I could just click it and draw a shape. Okay? Now when I draw a shape, it created a shape layer down here. And the shape layer has properties that allow us to edit it. If I open this up, you'll see these little drop downs all over After Effects. Anytime you see these little drop downs, it's stuff that you can edit. Okay? So I can go into this and say, oops, the color is right up here. Squished so I can barely see it. So I can change the color. I can go under the rectangle tools. I can set some positional keyframes. And I have to bring some stuff back because I hit it. There we go. Okay, so I can set some keyframes to move this around. I could also scale it if I needed to. I could also rotate it. I could also change the opacity of it. I could add a stroke to it. And the stroke is up here. I just can't see it. So I'll make this bigger. I'll make it that color. Okay, so I can very easily customize something that I just kind of like drew on the page and then modified. Now the other thing that I can do is under Layer, you'll see that there's a new layer, and then these are the different items that I can choose for that. So you'll see one of them is text. Not a big surprise at what text is going to do. It's going to allow us to create text. The next one is solid, and a lot of you aren't going to understand what that is right away because you've probably never seen that before. But that's basically like a blank canvas. Okay, like I want to do something where I have a blank canvas to do it on. Right now, if I go to Effect, I can't add any effects because there's nothing down here to add an effect to. But if I created a new layer, a new solid, and I'll just leave that the default size, then I can go to Effect and I can do any one of these things. I can add lightning. There we go. And now I have lightning. And then if I hit play, the lightning's not going to do anything because I have to actually animate it. There we go. Okay, so we can add lightning to things and add whatever to it. Okay, so there's lots of different little effects and plugins and different things that we can play with to get that to happen. Okay, so for this first project, what we're doing is we're simply just going to be drawing it in Illustrator and then doing everything like that. Eventually, we'll get into just using shapes, and eventually we'll start playing with layers and start doing some more of that kind of work inside there. Off to the right here, this is all of our little palettes that you might be using. So one of them is info, pretty much like you've used inside of Photoshop or Illustrator. Okay, it has an X and Y position. It has color information when I have a layer there. There we go. You'll see that there's also an A. A stands for alpha, which we'll get into what that means when we get to that point. There's effects and presets. There's character setups. There's paragraph 2. I think that's just under here. Paragraph is just, oh, it's right there. Okay. And we can move these things around too to get them to be exactly how we want it set up. The effects and presets is awesome. Normally I don't go up here. I don't go to effect and try to find the effect this way. That's why it takes me a second to find them. I usually go here and just type it in. I want lightning. And then I can add lightning to whatever object it is that I'm creating there. So you'll find this to be a big help. Once you understand what some of these tools are called, you'll know what the names are, and you just call them out like that. Okay. There's also some painting tools and clone stamping and erasing and some other stuff. that eventually we'll get into and start playing with. Some of these we'll never touch and really go into depth just because of the nature of these individual tools that we're just not going to play with them. All right, so that's that. All right, so in a nutshell, that's the After Effects interface. We'll play with this a lot more. We'll start exploring it a lot more. But these are the nuts and bolts. We're bringing in footage. We're creating compositions. We're dropping it on the timeline. We're playing with these pieces of footage to get them to do what we want them to do. All right. So now what we're going to do is let's take a... And then for this assignment, what we were discussing before is the size inside of After Effects. What size are we using when we render our stuff in After Effects? By 540. Okay. So that's our resolution. That's our aspect ratio of what we're going to be doing. Now, our elements that we're going to be bringing in are not going to be that exact size because there are certain things that we are going to use each element for. Okay. So for instance, this guy here, this Angry Bird is more of a square shape, okay? So it's kind of, you don't need to separate everything. Some people will draw everything on one Illustrator layer composition and just put everything on different layers and do it that way. I like to keep my stuff separated. That way I can focus on what the Angry Bird looks like, what the background looks like what everything else is going to look like. So we're going to make a new document inside Illustrator. So we go to File, New, and I'll have to shrink this over, I think, so I can see. Yes, there we go. So we're going to make a new document. Now, if you zoom in on an Illustrator image, something you've drawn inside of Illustrator, is it pixelated or is it smooth? What is it? No, it's smooth. Okay. Illustrator is vector, right? Photoshop is raster based. So what that means is that if we were to draw something perfectly round inside of Illustrator, we could scale it up to be 10 billion pixels, or we can scale it down to be 2 pixels and it would still look pretty smooth, right? Right. So inside here, the pixels don't really matter because when we're in After Effects, we can change all of that stuff and it'll maintain that entire workflow. So I'm just going to make this, let's say 128 pixels by 128 pixels. Okay. Now we could have easily done that 128 inches by 128 inches because it doesn't matter. But we're going to decide to 128 pixels by 128 pixels and hit OK. All right. If your Illustrator is like mine, you'll come up with this transparency grid, which is kind of annoying. I think that's just one of the new perks of Illustrator. So under View, there's the Hide Transparency Grid. And then we don't have to look at that. Okay? I don't know why they put that there. So under View, Hide Transparency Grid, and then we can not see that anymore. All right, so now we're looking at our stuff. We do have these like little green lines going around it. We want to focus our attention into one of these green lines, or just one or the other, doesn't matter which, to set him up. When we're in After Effects, that's where all the magic is going to happen, okay? So we have to, again, think about what is going to happen to this thing. Watch what I do up here. This is what I don't want you to do, is to draw, okay? Let's pretend that this is my bird, and then for his beak, you come down and go, oh, I want this crazy big beak, okay? Because what's going to happen when you have this guy with this beak bouncing along the ground? Well, the beak's going to hit the ground, right? And it's going to look weird because now the beak's like going through the ground. So you want to keep in mind, where's our ground at? Where's the bottom of this bird? And we don't want to extend past that. So that's why I like to use these lines here. If you look at this green line, I lined up my circle of my bird with that green, or with that bottom line, with that green line. It's one of these rulers. Hide edges or artboard, one of those. Hide video rulers, no. It's something. Hide corner widget, that's not it. Hide artboard, no. It's something special that I get, no one else gets. regardless if you have it or not, okay, it's not so important that you have it. All you have to do is just keep in mind that it has to be like within a range, right? So if you did this, let's say you didn't have those green lines, circle, where's my circle tool? Right there. Okay, so I'm going to draw it from the circle here, or from the center. I'm going to hold Alt and hold Shift, and then I would just draw it right to the edges or near the edges of my document. Okay, I can use that as my buffer too, to draw it pretty close to the edge of that document, and that will be fine. So draw your circle on there. Make sure your circle is perfect. Okay, remember your hotkeys. I'm at the center. There's a little plus sign right there. I'm at the center. So I'm going to click and drag. I hold down Alt and I hold down Shift, and that makes a perfect circle. And then I can let go with my mouse and then let go with my keyboard shortcuts. Okay, so draw your perfect circle. If you don't have this little green check right here, and you go to your circle, as you get closer to the center of it, as you get closer to the center of your document, you'll see this little line pop out. Okay, and that line is indicating where the center of that document is. So that's where you want to get a bit closer, and then click and drag. All right, so now that we have this, then we can start to draw other stuff. So I'm going to show you just a couple things that will help get you to those next stages of creating your bird. A lot of this is going to be repetitive stuff, okay? Again, focus on individual pieces and what you want the end product to look like, but don't get caught up in trying to make it absolutely perfect at this stage, okay? So one thing that I like to do is I'll use the paintbrush tool. I have nothing selected and I want to make the hair, so I'll just go like this and just kind of make some wavy hair. It goes outside of the box, but remember, I can scale everything down once I'm done, okay? So I don't care about that. Now I want to get the hair and his skin to look, or in his head to look better. So I'm just going to pull this out a bit, like that, let's say. And then what I need to do is I want to cut this off. I don't want to have these little pieces sticking inside of here because it looks kind of funny. Now I could do this, right? I could just make this, come on. Let's just say I filled that in. That's the first time that happened. Okay, if I grab that, there we go, and I color this in, and I put that on top, you can see how I get this look, right? Where the hair is there, it doesn't look like it really blends in with it. It doesn't look like it's all part of the same object. Okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to use the Pathfinder. So under Window, there's a Pathfinder. And I have mine somewhere. Where is he? Window. Oh, there he is, down here. Illustrator is not responding. I'll wait for you to respond. It's one of those days. There we go. So I'm going to grab my Pathfinder. And with everything, especially as a student, I mean, don't get caught up in needing to know every single step of every single thing. Obviously, it can make things go quicker. But for some things, just try it out and see. If I hit Unite, there it is. It worked. But guess what? What if it didn't work? What if I got this? Then I just hit Undo, and then I go to the next one. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. Oh, there it is. Now look at how easy that was just to make that all as one shape. I didn't try to draw it, you know, draw this outline and then draw that outline. It's very easy to just kind of blend those things together. And then I can take the item here and just give it a color. And now I have the base color for my little Angry Bird dude. Okay? So put the hair on your guy. Oops, wrong button. Alright, so now we have this here. Again, I can customize the color. I can customize the stroke. Oops, stroke. Okay? So I have a very thick stroke, or I have a very thin stroke, or whatever. So then what I want to do is make the eyes. And for the eyes, I'm just going to start off with what the eyes I think would look like, right? They would be white with maybe a black outline. If you've forgotten a lot of your Illustrator stuff, maybe time to go back to your Illustrator and start to play around with some of those tools that you may have forgotten. So I'm just grabbing the path and just tweaking it to make it look like the eyes of what I want my thing to look like. Again, don't spend too much time with this kind of thing. Just understand the concept of I drew it, now I need to tweak it, whatever.
What if your paintbrush is too big?
The stroke up. Little bit. The next thing I want to do for this is I want to add a little bit of extra color to the Angry Bird. So if you've seen them, they actually have like around their body. Let me see. Oops. There you go. On the bottom of them, you'll see how they have this extra little coloring right here and right there. Some of them even have like a shadow going along the bottom. All right, so that's what we want to add for this one. So here's the way that I do it. Now, it's not the only way to do this kind of stuff, but again, this is the way I do it. You can do it however you like, as long as you end up with some nice results. So I'm drawing just a circular shape. If you've forgotten some of your tool keys, one of the helpful ones in Illustrator is as you're drawing something, let's say I needed to reposition this, I can hold the space bar and just move that shape around. Okay, so if I'm like, oh, I want it, instead of moving it later, I know I want it about here and about that big. There we go. So something, let's say like that. Okay, so I'm going to give it the color that I want it to be. Blue for now. I can change that later. And what I need to do is, just like we used Pathfinder before, I want to cut out just this shape here so I don't have that bottom shape. So if I do that, watch what's going to happen, because I know what's going to happen. If I do this, oops, it cuts that out, so I don't want that. Now if you look at the options, you'll see too, minus front. Okay, so basically what that's going to do is subtract the front from it. If I hold Alt and click on it, it does that exact thing here. Or that, actually that's perfect, that's exactly what I want. But then I got rid of my guy, right? So any suggestion what I should do there?
Make a copy.
Make a copy, right? That's the easiest thing to do. We just grab this one, copy it. Now I don't want to just paste it anywhere. I want to paste it in place, exactly where it's at. Boom. So then I can just grab these, do that, and then I have this extra shape that I could then color whatever I wanted. Okay, let me do it again so you can see it. There we go. So I drew my shape and I gave it a color so it's obvious what it is. I took the bird shape back here and just copied it, pasted it in place, and then grabbed them both and did that. And then I can color. Okay, so give that easier. So for my beak, I'm just going to draw just a beak shape. Again, I want to keep it kind of like inside of my work area. There we go. And I'm going to duplicate this, scoot that down. I'm going to do the same copy and paste trick. There we go. So just my very quick Angry Bird right there. And then we could add some other stuff to this, like, lines under the eyes. Now here's another Angry Bird that I drew. This is the same technique that we just went over, okay? Now with this one, I gave him eyelids, and the eyelids make him look extremely tired. But when I take the eyelids away, you can see how now he looks excited, okay? So thinking about just how these kinds of things can help add a little bit of character to your guy are important. Just taking these eyebrows and pulling them down like this and maybe making them a little more ruffled. It might be too big, but we'll see. You see, and now the guy, obviously they're crossed, but now he's going to look a little bit angrier than he did before. Okay, so these are quick ways to just add a little bit more detail and story to your guy. Keep in mind a couple other things. How the eyes, the front eye that's closest to us is on top. Some people will just kind of neglect this, is that they have stuff like this, where now that back eye is on front, and that doesn't make it look good. It looks kind of funky. So we want that back eye to be below it so that it makes a little bit more sense. Okay. A couple other things that may help as you're doing this is as you do a stroke. So for like these eyebrows, I just did a stroke like that. And there it is. So this just has a stroke on this line. You can go to Object Path and say Outline Stroke. And now you're able to hit the Direct Select tool and grab the individual components and pull those components into the shape of an eyebrow. Okay? So you just draw with the pen tool, or you can draw it with any one of these tools like that. Make sure it just has that stroke on it. And then you go to Object Path and then you say Outline Stroke. So you'll see, too, the kind of coolness of this whole project. A lot of it's going to rely on your ability to go into Illustrator and draw your guy, right? So if you can't draw in Illustrator, the guy's not going to look very good. And so when you go into After Effects, that whole thing is going to basically fall apart, okay? So you're going to continue drawing your Angry Bird guy. Then when you're satisfied with it, it doesn't have to be 100% complete, just kind of satisfied with where you're at with it at the moment, or you need a break from it, then you're going to make a new composition. Okay, so before we do a new comp, let's save what we have so far, because I don't think anyone's saved anything. So hit Save As. And if you have your thumb drive, you can put it in and save it to the thumb drive, or you can save it to the P drive. Okay, so I don't have a P drive on my laptop, but on my desktop I have this P drive folder, and you can just save it in there and just call it whatever your last name is, _AngryBird. Okay, so after you've saved your guy to the P drive, you have it saved so it doesn't crash, then you can make a new document. And the new document is going to be for the background. And then you're just going to do the same thing, starting to work on the background stuff of this one. Okay? Now, just like we talked about, the size of the background is going to matter because when we bring it into After Effects, we want things to kind of match up and line up with our composition. So our width for our background, let me draw it out, 1280 pixels by 720. Okay? So I'm setting this to 1280 by 720. We probably aren't going to have a whole lot of movement happening like that, okay, from side to side, just because our animation will be pretty short. But imagine that you have a fast scene. You have, the guy's in the city, and then it zips, now he's at his office, right? So for that one, you may have a lot bigger composition that you're kind of cycling through. So for this, we're going to leave it at 1280 by 720 and hit OK. we'll do the same thing with that stupid transparency grid. There we go. All right. And then what we want to do is keep in mind that even though this is 1280 by 720, we don't want to go right to the edges, right? If we go right to the edge and we start drawing where the guy is going to be bouncing, it's going to be cut off when we get inside of After Effects, okay? Obviously, we can scale things, but we don't want to do that. So it's always best to kind of get a reference point. So I'm going to go to my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to click on my desktop here and make this 960 by 540. Okay, and then I can just center this, and then I'll know that this is where my video is going to be. Okay, this black box that I just added, that's where my video is going to be. The stuff on the outside is all that extra stuff that I could have pan left or right. Okay, now if you know ahead of time, my camera is going to go from left to right, and it's not going to go back and forth, then you can kind of move this around. I could just move this all over here, and that way I design everything this way so that as I'm sliding my camera like that, I have all that extra footage. Okay? But again, we can adjust this kind of stuff inside of After Effects. All right? So now that we have this set up for our background, all we need to do is just draw it. Just like we drew the other stuff, I'm just going to open up mine so you can see it. Background. Okay? So you can see in mine how I drew it. Not only did I draw it past the border, but I also went a little bit further and beyond, just in case. Okay? There's nothing wrong with even going further outside that box, just in case you need it. All right? So I drew my sun, I drew the clouds, I drew these mountaintops. The mountaintops were drawn the exact same way we did that little half coloring on the bird. Okay? Where I just took a different layer and then just plopped it on there. These things were just created and tweaked and then duplicated. Okay, so those are where my guy is going to be landing and bouncing along, so I have that set up. All right, so for next week, for Monday, when you come in, try to have this done, okay, and your Angry Bird done based on your designs that you built. You drew 20-ish Angry Birds, you drew 10-ish backgrounds. Take those and make one of them. Make one Angry Bird, make one background setup, and when you come in on Monday, we're going to go through and fix it in After Effects so that we can bring it into, fix it in Illustrator so we can bring it into After Effects, and then we'll set up all of our compositions and all that other stuff and start actually animating and playing with it. Okay? Any questions? No?